Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate that. I have two favors. One, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And two, whenever you're shopping for stuff, use my affiliate links. It really helps me out. All right, this video is an in-depth review of Honda's NT1100, which they finally brought to the United States. The review format on this is going to be a little bit different, a little bit more condensed than I usually do, and I'm just trying it out. So please let me know in the comments if you like this shorter and different review format, or if you want me to go back to the usual in-depth review with the longer video. Let me know down in the comments below. I really appreciate it. All right, with that, let's get into it. We can trace Honda sport touring motorcycles all the way back to the early 1980s with bikes like Honda's CBX. Later, powered by smooth-running V4 engines, we saw the ST1100 and ST1300, sometimes called the Pan-European. On the sporty side, Honda had the VFR models, which sadly ended in 2017 due to stricter emissions regulations. Answering the call for a return of a Honda Sport Tourer, something smaller and more affordable than the Goldwing, Honda released the NT1100 in 2022, but it was only sold in Europe, leaving us Americans high and dry. For 2025, Honda have finally brought the NT1100, already in its much improved second generation, to the USA. Unlike in other markets where you can get the NT1100 with electronic suspension and a manual or DCT dual clutch transmission, in the US we only get one bike, the DCT with manually adjustable suspension, and you better like blue because that's the only color available. MSRP is just $11,899 US, making it a great value compared to the sport touring competition from other brands. When asked why Honda is only bringing the DCT model to the US, they said it is because over 2/3 of riders choose the DCT, so they didn't see the need to bring both bikes here. However, I suspect it has more to do with budgets and with regulatory requirements. Honda told us that the target customer for the NT is between 40 and 60 years old, uses their bike for commuting and weekend trips, and wants a relaxing and practical ride. Powering the NT is the engine from the Africa Twin. It's a 1084cc parallel twin that makes around 100 horsepower and about 82 foot-pounds or 112 newton-meters of torque. That's hooked up to a 6-speed dual-clutch transmission that offers both automatic modes and manual shifting using handlebar mounted buttons. There's no clutch lever and no foot shifter. The DCT shifts extremely smoothly and requires less input from the rider than a traditional transmission, making it great for stop-and-go traffic or carrying a passenger. It gathers data from the bike's IMU or inertial measurement unit, so it knows when you're cornering or going up and down hills. It has 4 different modes, a drive mode that shifts up through the gears extremely early to save fuel, and 3 levels of sport mode, with increasing levels of sporty, meaning higher RPM, shift points. Because you can't park the bike in gear, the NT is equipped with a parking brake activated by a lever on the right side of the handlebars. You'll want to use it whenever you park the bike to prevent it from rolling off the side stand. Fully fueled and ready to ride, the NT weighs just under 550 pounds or 250 kilograms. Compared to the Africa Twin, it offers a lower seat height, steeper suspension rake angle, and a shorter wheelbase. It also rolls on 17-inch wheels compared to the larger wheels you'll find on the Africa Twin models. Suspension is by Showa with around 6 inches or 152 millimeters of travel. There are no adjustments except for preload front and back, and we'll get to why this is a problem in the riding impression section. Front braking is by Nissin with 4 piston calipers squeezing 310 millimeter rotors. The side panniers you see in this video are not standard and will add around $1,200 to the price. Also available are a top box, inner pannier bags, a comfort seat, and larger passenger pegs. The panniers, which we used on our 2-day test ride around Southern California, are spacious, easy to use, and can easily fit a full-face helmet. I know because I tested it. The windshield is generously sized and adjustable over a very wide range with 5 different positions. The adjustment lever is designed to be used with one hand, but can be difficult to adjust while riding. I'll talk about this more later in the video. The NT has an extensive electronics and rider aid package. and many riders will be intimidated by the sheer volume of buttons and displays at first glance. This was proven out by the other journalists attending the press launch. However, journalists are not owners. They didn't take the time to read the manual, and they're easily frustrated because they ride a different bike every week. Actual owners will become familiar with the control layout after a few rides. The NT has cruise control activated by buttons on the right handlebar. It also has traction control, which Honda calls HSTC, or Honda Selectable Torque Control, and that has 3 different levels. It also has cornering ABS, which cannot be shut off, unlike the Africa Twin. The NT has 5 rider modes accessible via the large touchscreen TFT, and here's how they work. First, when the bike is delivered, the dashboard layout will be different in each mode. I recommend going into the settings and setting all rider modes to the gold dashboard display to make all settings and readouts accessible at all times. Changing ride modes only changes 2 things: throttle response, which Honda labels as power, and engine braking. Traction control is independently controlled either via the touchscreen or the handlebar switch. Honda gives us 2 rider modes, which can be set to your preference for dashboard display mode, throttle response, and engine braking. All 3 parameters, throttle response, engine braking, and traction control, are displayed as pie charts on the dashboard. However, some of the pie charts work the opposite way in which you would assume, so study your manual if you want to understand how these charts actually correspond to the actual setting. Heated grips, which are standard, are controlled via the function button on the handlebars. Honda is the only manufacturer that, thankfully, includes Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. This is the reason for the second LCD display underneath the TFT, so you can still see vital information while your mapping or other applications are displayed on the TFT. Unfortunately, this system requires your phone to be plugged into the bike and also requires a Bluetooth headset to function. Therefore, many of us were unable to use it during our test ride. However, I've used it myself on my previous Africa Twin, and it's a great feature, but would be made better if it allowed a wireless connection. With a seat height of 32.3 inches or 820 millimeters, the NT is much lower than its taller Africa Twin cousin. I am 5'10" or 178 centimeters tall with the 32-inch inseam, and it was a very easy reach to the ground. The seating position is upright and neutral, and most of us found it very comfortable, even after 6 hours of riding. Huge thanks to Law Tigers for sponsoring today's video. If you've been in a motorcycle accident, I highly recommend contacting Law Tigers' nationwide network of motorcycle lawyers, because the truth is, insurance companies will try to settle for the bare minimum. Hiring Law Tigers can potentially get you covered for lost wages, pain and suffering, and more. Plus, there is no upfront cost at all to hire them. So if you've been a victim of an accident or know someone who has, please contact Law Tigers, and their info will be below. Thanks again to Law Tigers for sponsoring this video.
Okay, let's do some 0 to 80 mile per hour back to 0 testing. So we'll use sport mode 3, we'll accelerate maximum, and then I'll brake as fast as I can. So I would say that's pretty good. I mean, I'm getting motion sickness. The bike sometimes will shift a little bit short of red line, just depends kind of what it feels like. And then the brakes are, you know, okay as long as you go all the way into them. Let's do that one more time. Yeah, so 0 to 80 to 0 is pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. So riding at 85 miles an hour or so, the windshield all the way up, and there's more buffeting, more shaking on my helmet than I would like. It's not all that smooth. There is a lot of wind protection, but I can feel the winds getting between these kind of areas here and buffeting me around pretty good at these higher speeds. The wind coverage on my legs and everything is very good, actually. A note on the mirrors, pretty vibration free. A note about vibrations, I don't feel really any vibrations, even at 85 miles an hour. Very good. Stability on the highway feels very good. The drive mode on the DCT, the D mode, is still very conservative with upshifting. it's better than before. They have improved it, but sometimes it still feels like it's lugging a little bit. And by going into sport mode 1, that takes care of that. And sport mode 1 or 2 would be my preferred mode, even for urban riding. But the DCT tuning is very, very good with these latest versions, and you have the different modes. In terms of engine heat, I do have a little bit of warmth on my legs. It's 70 degrees, so it's not warm right now. I feel a little bit of heat as I do with the Africa Twin, but it's not bothersome yet at an ambient temperature of just 70 degrees. Mid-range power response is very good, and we got off the lines at the lights. It's so fast with the DCT because you can kind of like brake torque a little bit and then just shoot off, especially if you use one of the sport modes. Yeah, see, sport mode 2 keeps you in a decent gear, but you can always override with the paddle shifters like that. It will eventually go back to the gear you were in. Or you can use the full manual mode. If you use manual mode, it's just going to stay in whatever gear you're in, and you shift with your fingers over here. It works great. It's almost 4 p.m. on the first day. I have some test notes. The windshield is good at about halfway up, because when you put it all the way up, it gets too vertical, it creates buffeting. If you put it all the way down, it just gives you a ton of air, which is good if it's hot and you want that airflow. Really good range of adjustment. About halfway up, most of us seem to have kind of found the sweet spot with that. Everything else with the bike, like the only downsides that stand out a little bit, I think, when you ride it really fast, just the DCT programming, even in Sport 2 or 3, is still sometimes just doesn't give you the drive, you know, coming out of corners. It's just in the wrong gear sometimes. And then you just end up using the manual mode, which is fine. You can do that. It just takes some getting used to the triggers. Also, the suspension is bouncy and really lacks good damping control. So when you're pitched over far in a corner and riding over bumps, the bike can feel a bit unsettled. And overall suspension refinement is not very good, but I think that's one of the ways that they met the price point of this bike, was by putting on more of a budget suspension. The braking, like when you're really, like that's a good example, when you're coming downhill into these fast corners, you really want to trail brake, and the brakes are okay, but I feel like you could use a little bit more power. But it's not bad. I think most people aren't going to notice that unless you ride really, really fast. In terms of lean angle, we haven't, you know, you will eventually like scrape the foot peg, but you have a pretty generous amount of cornering clearance there.
Summarizing the pros and cons of the Honda NT1100. For me, the pros are, number one, I think this bike is incredibly good value for money with not many direct competitors, at least here in the US. Number two, the engine has a lot of torque, and although it may not win the horsepower battle with other bikes, you really notice the engine torque, especially at low RPM. Next up for me, the touchscreen TFT with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay built in. There is a learning curve to the electronics on this bike, but once you learn to use them, they're very, very good. Next up for me is the generous wind coverage, including wind coverage for your legs. What are the downsides? For me, the number one thing that stood out as a downside over 2 days of testing is the bouncy and undersprung suspension. It can really hamper more aggressive riding, for example, hitting bumps when riding through a corner. It may also be an issue when carrying extra weight, such as carrying a passenger. Next up, the startup time delay for the TFT screen is between 10 and 20 seconds, and that can get very, very annoying. Next up, there's no manual transmission option, and I think that's kind of a shame for buyers who may want that option, at least here in the US, where you can only get DCT. Next up, the windshield is rather difficult to adjust while riding, although it can be done, and there is a lot of wind buffeting in the top two positions. Next up, the DCT, the transmission shifts too early in automatic mode in all but the top two of the sport modes, and it often feels like you're lugging the engine when riding around town. Also, driving out of corners, you really end up using the manual mode because it just ends up in too high of a gear. Next up, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay should really be wireless like they are on the 2025 Goldwing. And finally, shaft drive would make this bike more touring friendly. All right, let's discuss the competition to the NT. Now, it's hard to find a true direct competitor for the NT1100 if you look at engine size, features, and the price point this bike comes in at. Compared to an Africa Twin, the NT is cheaper, has better wind protection, is lower to the ground, and handles slightly better on-road, although is held back by poor suspension. If you don't need off-road ability, you should strongly consider the NT before buying an Africa Twin. Compared to Honda's NC750X, the NT offers a lot more power, a lot more features, more wind protection, will be a better tourer and a better bike for taking a passenger. Compared to Honda's own Goldwing, the NT obviously gives up a lot in terms of features and refinement and power and everything. It's not really a fair comparison due to being half the price of a Goldwing. But at half price and still being a very good touring bike, the NT deserves a very hard look, unless you just have to have the luxury of the Goldwing. Compared to Kawasaki's Versys 1100, the NT gives up a lot in terms of features, electronic suspension, power, and other things, but does come in dramatically cheaper. Now, the Yamaha Tracer 9 is probably the closest competitor. For 2025, the Tracer 9 comes in at $12,600, but that includes the side panniers as standard. The Tracer is the sportier option with more horsepower, yet less torque, while the NT is more relaxed and laid back, also giving you the convenience of DCT. Final thoughts on Honda's NT1100. It's very easy to get caught up in the adventure bike craze of the past few years. But the truth is, if you don't need to go off-road, and let's be honest, most people with adventure bikes don't go off-road anyway, something like the NT offers a comfortable, practical solution with a lower seat height that's more accessible to more riders and a very low price tag as well. I'm super glad that Honda brought the NT1100 to the United States. Now, let me know what you think of the NT1100 down below in the comments. Also, let me know what you think of this shorter, more condensed review format with more narration versus more stand-up talking. I really would like to know what you think of this new format. Please support the channel. There's ways to do that down below. Thank you for watching. Ride safe. I will see you out there.